We're now going to move to a series of presentations on different aspects of the project, and then after that, there will be plenty of time for your questions, comments to what you're hearing. I have some questions I want to put to our speakers, but we will make this very much workshopy and interactive, I hope. But we do need first to hear about the great work they've been doing. They're going to come up one by one, make their presentations, go back to their seats, and at the end, I'll bring them all back up for our discussion. First of all, to kick us off, I am delighted to welcome Udo Prins, researcher in sustainable cultivation at the Louis Bolk Institute in the Netherlands, who's going to talk about the agronomic perspective of plant proteins in Europe. Udo, welcome. Over to you to start us off.
And thank you very much for the introduction and for pronouncing our institute right.
Is that rare?
That is quite rare because the Louis Bolk Institute poses for a lot of questions, and we are being introduced as the Louis Block, the Lois Bolk. So this is the best introduction I've had so far. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've got only 5 minutes. My mouth is aching to react to all the things that have been discussing already.
We can do that afterwards.
I'll do it afterwards. I'm here to represent the work that we've been doing in the last 5 years, 5 partners within the work package, focusing on the agronomic perspectives of plant proteins in Europe. I don't know whether it will start off. Oh, I'll do it.
You do it. You click click one, and there we are.
So we're from I'm from the Louis Bolk Institute, which is a tiny research institute in Holland, founded in the 70s, doing a lot of the work that our previous presenter has been advocating. But now focusing on the work that we've been doing in Protein2Food, starting at the base, so the primary production. First of all, plant proteins and the need for plant proteins, especially for the growing sector of meat analogues and dairy analogues that have been on the rise in the European Union. There's an increasing demand because it's one of the fast-growing sectors within the European economy. It has moved from the niche that it has been in about 10 years ago into a proper and substantial part of the economy. Large meat producers in Europe are trying to invest in meat analogues at this moment, really big ones in Holland as well. And as the rise of these meat analogues and plant protein products the demand is increasing, there's also an increasing demand for the products that make these new consumer products. At this moment, most of these products are still based on the plant proteins that are available at the market, which is soy, pea and wheat protein, but there is a growing demand for other alternatives that have been used so far. At the same time, at the production side, we've seen a steady decrease of the production of grain legumes, for instance, in Europe, starting already before the Second World War. In Holland, most of the grain legumes have been diminishing from the 1900s, going down to historically low levels in the post-war or the post-war period. But you here see that this is a European trend, and you see since the 1960s a gradual decrease of area of production, a small uprise in the, where do I point? Is it? No, that's not the one. Is this the pointer? No, this is not the pointer. Is there a red? Oh, there's a red button. You see a small surge in the 1980s when the European Union supported both the production and the processing of proteins. But since the end of the 80s, this support system was banished, and you see a historic low of production of plant proteins near 2010. At that moment, the European Union started to be aware of the problem and started to support plant proteins and legume production again, where you see a small rise or a rise in the production again. But what you can't see from this figure is that most of the production is mainly in the southern and eastern parts of Europe. That's one of them, and second of all, there are only 2 or 3 of the protein crops that make most of the surge, being soy is the most important one, but faba beans and peas is the second most important ones. And what you don't see is that, especially in the northwestern part, like in the Netherlands, where we come from, this rise of protein production has not occurred yet. And in Holland, as today, there is only a very limited amount of area which is dedicated to the production of plant protein. To alter this, the PROTEIN2FOOD has been working on looking into both alternatives to soy for the food industry, but also looking into the economic perspectives of a wide range of crops, concentrating both on crops with a high amount of protein in the grains, but also with a high quality of proteins. In the high quantity, we've been concentrating on faba bean and on white and blue lupin, and on the high quality, we've been concentrating on quinoa. But all the other crops that you see here have also been taken into account and have been part of our work. The work that we've been doing has been done by 5 partners. The work package leader coming from Italy, from Isofoam, here's in Italy. In Denmark, the University of Copenhagen. In Sweden, the Agricultural University of Sweden has been involved. The Louis Bolk here in Holland, but also in Romania by a company called Satian. And this is the kind of work that we've been doing, field trial testing, varieties, looking both at yield and protein yield, agronomic practices to try and maybe even increase either the yield or the yield stability, also looking at effects on soil quality and on soil and agrobiodiversity. So we've been looking at pollinators and the effect of crops on wild bee populations, for instance. And in Sweden, some work has been done on developing new breeding tools, whereas in Romania, commercial quinoa production and production and the selling of quinoa has been worked on. Looking at some of the results, we've been looking not just at yield, but on the amount of protein. You see that soy is one of the top and the most protein-rich plants in the world, reaching up to 40% of the grain being consisting of protein. There's only one crop known in the world, as far as I know, that surpasses soy, and that's Andean lupin, which can contain up to 50% of protein. As this is not yet a crop within Europe, we haven't been working on this one, but we have been working on those kind of crops, and you see that white lupin is the first one to be very close to the protein levels of soy.
Very briefly now, if you would.
Mm-hmm. And quinoa and amaranth being at the bottom end. Looking at the agronomic perspectives and the performances, faba bean seems to be the one to be looking for. Faba bean has the highest protein production per hectare under a lot of the conditions, both in the northern part, in Holland and in Denmark, but also in Italy. So it's got the highest protein production per hectare, so potentially being the cheapest protein source available. There's one negative to faba bean is that it needs a quite high quality of soil to produce these high protein levels. Lupin being the next best in that sense, and on the other hand, you see lentil, quinoa, amaranth, and buckwheat. This doesn't mean that for protein production, these crops are not relevant, because if the quality of the protein is much higher, it could be that those kind of crops can be very interesting to be produced for protein as well. So, as you can hear from the speakers after me, we have not been just looking at the protein and the primary production, but also the further processing. If certain kind of proteins, although not the most productive in an economic sense, are very, very potentially have a high use, then they could be used and could be very, very expensive as well, and could be quite interesting to be grown in the European countryside as well. At this moment, we have already seen that one of the crops that have appeared in our results as well, the faba bean, has been growing in interest, both from the food industry and from the processing industry. New products based on faba beans have already been introduced in the market, and also processing facilities have been produced.
You need to be very brief now, Udo. Sorry.
Yeah. What we've heard already is that protein food came at the right moment, I think. We've seen that there is, at this moment, a large interest from the food industry into other ingredients to be used, and all the data that we have been gathered within PROTEIN2FOOD can be of much use for that.
Thank you very much. We'll have an opportunity to come back on many of those questions later. You can develop, and I'll give you a chance, that aching to respond, I'll give you a chance later on. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Udo for now. So, I'm now delighted to welcome Jürgen Bez, who is Senior Scientist at the Fraunhofer Institute for Process Engineering and Packaging, IVV, in Germany, to talk to us about innovative plant protein ingredients. Over to you, Jürgen.
Good morning, everybody.
If you click once, you should come to your first slide, in theory. Let's try that. There we go.
Okay, here we are. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm here to represent Work Package 2 in the PROTEIN2FOOD, and in the next couple of minutes I will give you a short overview on the development of plant protein ingredients, on the work which we have done within the scope of the second work package in the project. Well, we have already heard in the previous presentation, when we look on the ingredients market, we see that the protein market is dominated by ingredients from soybean, from wheat, and from pea. So therefore, PROTEIN2FOOD focused on new or other protein crops for the development of protein-rich ingredients. These are crops with a high protein content, like legumes, lupin, lentil, and faba bean, or crops with a high protein quality, like quinoa, buckwheat, and amaranth. And all these ingredients are from crops which are not currently on the market, or not on the market at the stage when we started the project. So the development of protein ingredients from these crops and of suitable and also targeted processes for their production was one of the main objectives in our project, and also one of the challenges we had in the project. When we look on the processing, we had two strategies for the protein fractionation: dry fractionation and wet fractionation. For both of them, the hulling and milling of the seed was done before these steps as a primary step. The dry fractionation was applied to quinoa, amaranth, buckwheat, and faba bean. And the process in this case started from the flour, and then was a sieve classification or an air classification to fractionate the seeds. And the products we got were protein-rich flours, which had around 2 times higher protein content than the initial flour. As a second strategy, we investigated wet fractionation, which was successfully applied for faba bean, lentil, and the white lupin. The first step in this processing is an aqueous extraction, which could be done in one or in multiple steps, and then the protein is recovered by precipitation or by ultrafiltration, and to recover the protein from the protein extract. This then is followed by spray drying to get a dry powder. The resulting protein isolates had up to 3 times higher protein contents than the corresponding raw materials. And important to say here is that all of these processes first were developed in the lab, developed and optimized in the lab, and then scaled up to pilot scale or even industrial scale in case of the lupin. The process development delivered a number of high quality plant protein ingredients. First, protein-rich flours, which had protein contents of 24 to 37%, and also most important, protein isolates which had a protein content of 85 to 92%. These were produced of lupin, lentil, and faba bean. What you see here is an overall characterization or overall evaluation of their properties. And the most important finding was that we saw that the aqueous processing was successful to improve the nutritional properties of the products. The isolates had much lower anti-nutrients and improved in vitro digestibility. And we also saw that they had an improvement of the functional properties and also in some cases of the sensory properties. The properties of these products were comparable to commercial isolates like pea, and all these processes, all the ingredients were successfully applied in the food product development in our work package 3. As a conclusion, we can say that the results which we have achieved can form the basis for further commercialization. Most of the technologies we had developed were approved in pilot scale. So as a next step, these processes could be implemented in the industries, and also the protein ingredients could be used by the food processors to produce new food products. And this, in the end, could lead to new market opportunities for ingredient producers, and in the medium term also for an increase of the consumption of new plant protein products by the consumers. So this was a short overview on the processing. Oh, there's one slide missing. There's one slide missing. Seems not the.
Sorry.
Okay, but I just wanted to thank you all for your attention, and also thanks to my work package partners for their valuable results. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Jürgen. Thank you. And again, lots to come back to on in our discussion. Continuing our whistle-stop tour, around 5 years of very intensive detailed work, and we can only do a whistle-stop tour, but as I say, come back to some of these points later on. Delighted to welcome back Emanuele to talk to us about a new menu.
Thank you. That's me again. So I can see that my presentation is not the one, so I'm just moving.
Well, we've got an order problem here by the look of it.
Sorry, guys. So
No.
there is no my presentation. That's fine. And
Can you manage without?
of course I can.
Bless you.
But
Thank
you know,
you.
I have also nice pictures I'd like to show you regarding the food prototypes that have been developed.
Okay, in 2 minutes they will be up, so when they get them up, we'll just flick through, but you carry
Sure.
on in the meantime.
So
Thank you.
basically, as you understand so far, we grow protein, we extract protein, and then we try to make use of this protein. So in different food applications. And we investigate 3 different food, let's say, categories. The meat alternatives, the dairy alternatives, and also we fortify different bakery and pasta products. And of course, when we perform such activities, we make sure that we follow specific criteria. Of course, increasing, so having high protein content, with the texture and taste comparable to the commercial products, but also making sure that we have an outstanding nutritional profile, because this is one of the weak points nowadays in different plant-based products, and starting from, let's say, from the plant-based milk. I mean, most of the time, what you're purchasing is just water and sugar, where protein are not really a significant component beside the soy. So. As I say here, basically what we did, we tried to optimize the most essential parameters. So technofunctional properties, so functionalizing the protein in a way that basically were better fitting the different food categories that we were applying. Of course, improving the sensory properties. The first point that basically consumers are stressing when they are tasting or challenged with new products, make sure it tastes good. And of course, optical appearance also has a crucial importance. How we managed to move forward in food processing and development. So what we did, we screened our protein ingredients that we got from our colleagues in the World Package 2, and then we analyzed which are the main characteristics that actually are crucial for, let's say, identifying the better, let's say, application in the end products. So, and then we selected select and combine different ingredients. What we did here, we make sure that we identify the protein properties, but also the interaction between protein and other food components in a complex matrices, like in the bread products or in a dairy product, alternative dairy products. So, it's not just important to understand how the protein functionalities works, but also how they are interact with other main components in our food system. And then what we did, we optimized the recipe in a lab scale, and then for some of the products that we developed, we also were able to upscaling the characteristic and the products on a pilot scale. So, and of course, you're going to see in the top table over there, our prototype has been developed, so you will have plenty of time to look around and ask questions. Here you can see some of the pictures of the products has been produced. You can see this is spreadable-like meat, the milk alternative chicken strips, and also the milk alternatives, in particular the lentil-based milk, and the infant food basically has been developed using lentil protein isolates, and also different range of pasta and bread products. Some of the products also has been fully commercialized from our partner in Peru and also from Uganda. So which are the key messages I would like to not give to you today? Well, for the protein-to-food, what we did, we were able to validate on lab scale different type of food and beverages prototypes, which could be the benefits for the industry. Definitely, now potentially new market opportunity for the food producer, but also for the consumers. Well, basically, what we can, let's say, offer to the consumers, more nutritious and sustainable food options for them. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Emanuele. Thank you. And again, Emanuele will be back later on for your questions and for our discussion. Continuing our tour, Andreas Detzel, Managing Director, Institute for Energy and Environmental Research in Germany, talking about high-processed foods. Are they sustainable? Coming back to that issue raised by Nick about how we produce it as well as what we produce being so crucial. Back to you.
Thanks, Jackie, for your introduction. Now I am waiting for
yeah,
my presentation to be displayed. Yes.
The order got a bit messed up, so hopefully...
I tried to make a start.
No, we're there.
Well,
we're there. It should. There we are. You're in business.
Great. So as you could see in the previous presentations, there is quite some processing involved in order to obtain those ready-to-use plant-based foods with a high protein content. So the crucial question we had, and we had that from the beginning of the project, was, is it sustainable to produce these products, especially if you compare them against conventional animal-based products? In order to address that question, we carried out life cycle assessment, and the life cycle assessment comprised all the process steps from farming to producing the final product, as well on the animal-based side and on the protein crop-based side. And today I'm going to present results for 4 lines of products, which were meat in the chunky style, sausage, which can be spread, so pâté style, a burger, and milk made or from animals or from plants. And in order to address that, we looked at a set of environmental indicators, and they are quickly displayed here. For instance, climate change or aquatic eutrophication, land use, phosphate use, energy use. But I will come back to those later on directly in the results. And here we see those 4 pairs of comparison I had mentioned before. VMA always stands for vegetable meat alternative. So we have a meat alternative compared to chicken meat. We have a spread type compared to a pig sausage. We have a burger compared to beef burger, and a plant milk compared to cow milk. And what you see is here the carbon intensity. And you see we refer that to different amounts of product in order to have it all in the same graph. But what is easily visible here in the brown color, the animal-based products, they have a higher higher carbon footprint, especially in the burger, for the burger and for the plant milk. But if we include the effects of direct land use change, and what does that mean? It means that we include the effects of soy feed introduced from South America, and we assume that, and we have heard that before, we assume that the soy causes destruction of rainforests, for instance. Then if we include that, we see that the differences for all the 4 comparisons are quite similar, and the advantages of the plant-based foods are striking. Now, how does it look if we go to a larger environmental footprint? You have seen the different indicators, and they are displayed here in a spider diagram. And the spider diagram, in order to read it, you see here in green the plant-based. It's in this case a lentil extrudate material or product compared against a chicken meat. And you see the worst results for each indicator displayed or set to 100%, and the better result is always shown in the center of the graph. And what we can see is that for most of the indicators, the lentil extrudate performs better than the chicken meat. What surprised us, it is not necessarily the case in the area of agricultural land needed to produce those products. And in the beginning, this was a bit surprising to us. But what you have to bear in mind here is that chickens are quite good feed converters, especially those highly industrialized feed chicken raising approaches. And lentils as a crop source have relatively low yields per hectare. We have seen that in the first presentation. So what we did do here is we made a simulation using the same process chain, but we plugged in faba bean, which we saw before has a much higher yield per hectare, and that already changes the situation. The drawback we have seen here is converted into an advantage. We still have, and that was a point Nick made in his presentation, we still have a similar energy. This is the non-renewable primary energy demand. We have a similar primary energy demand due to the process energy needed in extracting, isolating the proteins, and then finally producing those products. So my conclusion is that we could show that plant protein foods can contribute to more sustainable diets. We still see the need for process optimization, and we see the need to use different variety of crops. We cannot only use lentils, for instance. We need a mixture of faba beans, lentils, and all the others which are there on the market and which can be produced in Europe. And we also see that the choice we make as a consumer matters. Reduction of meat, of course, it's in everybody's mouth nowadays, and to eat more plant proteins too. And we see that high processed food can be a good alternative, but we should not forget that we also have to mix that diet with less processed food, or even with basic foods we cook at home. Well, yeah, that was my message for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So, picking up very much on Nick's point from earlier, and also pointing to the way forward, what more we need to do to build on those very interesting results. Time for questions very soon now. We have one more presentation. I am delighted to welcome Consuelo Varela Ortega, Professor in Agricultural Economics at the Polytechnic University of Madrid, to talk to us about plant protein trends, social sustainability, and people, what matters. Consuelo.
Okay, thank you very much, Yaki, for the introduction. Well, this part is a little bit of a change, because this is the socioeconomic analysis of the protein transition, and what is the role of the people and society in this transition. Okay, to address these issues, and this is just a flash of what we have been doing. We were addressing this in a rather holistic way, that is going from a general macro view, looking at the trend using econometric analysis, also on the suitability of some crops in the future in conditions of climate change, which is not presented here. Then going down to a meso view, looking at the equivalent analysis that was presented by Andreas, but under a socioeconomic perspective using the life cycle assessment, and then down to a more micro level analysis using what are the perceptions of different types of stakeholders using multi-criteria analysis. Some of the work has already been published, some is in the process of being published, and there are some copies if somebody is interested of some of these papers. Okay, so with respect to the trends, and this is equivalent of what Udo was presenting in production. This is the consumption. We have seen that in the world terms from the 60s to the 2013, which is close to when we started the project, consumption has decreased over the years in the world averages. In Europe, also equivalent of what was presented before, there is some differences in over the years, the red line, and that coincides with some cultural differences in the different countries and socioeconomic factors, and certainly fluctuations in the support policy that was commented before. Okay, what can we say in terms of going down the scale and looking at separate countries? Are all the countries in Europe behaving similarly or not? Okay, we see in this chart that in blue, these are the countries that are increasing their consumption in protein crops, such as France, Romania, Denmark, and some others, to a lesser extent, Portugal, the UK. And some of the countries are decreasing their consumption, like Germany, and which is a little bit striking, was countries, Mediterranean countries such as Spain, Italy, and Greece that are heavy consumers, traditional consumers of protein products, have decreased for various reasons. So we can really not answer that there is only one pattern of behavior in Europe. We see differences. So again, these territorial approaches that Nick was commenting as well is important. Okay, then going to the EU, this is the equivalent chart that Andreas was presenting. That is, except that what we did was a complementary social life cycle assessment, looking at the food system in the sense that we were looking at the production state, also the process and retailing and consumption, using around 30 indicators from different sorts, such as social indicators like gender equality, etc. These are the economic indicators, and these are the consumption-related, like fiber content, vitamin content, etc. Okay, can we say that there is an equivalent sustainability or performance of these indicators as what was presented before in the case of environmental sustainability? We cannot say exactly the same, because we see that in the case of the economic indicators, that the new products, the blue ones, are not performing better than the equivalent chicken meat, which is, this is the product that we chose for this example. So we cannot speak about one-sided sustainability. In terms of socioeconomic sustainability, we see that okay, in a scale from 4 to 5, which is the way we measured the indicators, we may increase in this non-good performance in the EU by 5%, and going down the zoom to a specific country, this could be even larger than that. So that means that we need to look at this trade-off between socioeconomic sustainability and environmental sustainability. Then, again, going down the zoom and looking at the what the people think, we were doing some exercises, and we wanted to look at what the opinions of the people are in terms of supporting this protein transition towards 2030, increasing production and consumption, which is something that the project was foreseeing, 25 increase in production, 10% in consumption. So this is a backcasting exercise, and the stakeholder in a consensus discussion identified several key pathways for that. One is related to research and development that has already been commented, also strengthening the value chain. So I think this idea of food system approach is extremely important. That was already commented before. The other one was education and awareness and policy support, and the environmental protection was a cross-cutting issue around. We see that these pathways are repeated in several international institutions and key articles that have been discussing this. Okay, then what could we say about the individual stakeholders? Okay, we used then multi-criteria analysis. That is, this is not a consensus. This is the different opinions of the different stakeholders. So we used 14 criteria grouped in several types of indicators, economic, environmental, etc. And we see that was valued. This is a percent scale. That what was valued. This is the orange bar. By the group of stakeholders were the economic indicators, economic criteria, and the environmental criteria, and last was policy and technological. What can we say about the individual indicators, producers, processors, etc., when comparing the two products, I mean the plant meat and the chicken meat? Okay, we can see that the chicken meat is the blue and the plant is the orange. We can see that in overall, the plant meat were valued more than the chicken meat, but this is just a perception of the stakeholders, but even more so by the consumers. And obviously the environmental NGOs, because they have this idea of protecting the environment, consumer probably related to health, but this is not the case that we find in the case of the producers and the processors, which is consistent with what we saw in the previous analysis of socioeconomic sustainability. So, okay. Oh.
There we are.
Okay. So, to wrap up, in terms of research here, I think that what we would need, and we have tried to do, probably we would do it differently now, is that this holistic view of the research in the protein transition, that there are some societal challenges and methods that should be considered. I think that this food system approach, which is very much in line with the Food 2030 program that was explained before, and also I think it is very much in line with the new trends of the research programs in the EU. I mean, this Horizon Europe, this different types of methods and approaches. With respect to the policy, I think we just mentioned this idea of not only one-sided sustainability, but there is a need to balance the different consequences that was already explained. And that is something important. We have here the territorial approaches as well, because that will affect policy uptaking, because we have a common policy that will be uptaken probably differently in different parts of the EU and different parts of a given country. So with respect to society, we can underline the diversity across the EU in terms of territories, in terms of the spatial scale, and also in terms of the different visions that the different types of stakeholders have that should be reflected in the in terms of the societal challenges that we are facing, which is something that Nick was explaining very well, that we need a different type of production approach. Okay, and that's it.
Thank you very much indeed, Consuelo. And please, if you steal my seat, I'm going over there. And please, with the rest of you, come back. Don't leave us, Consuelo.
I need some water.
Oh, I'll bring, there's water here. There's plenty of water here. If you take my seat and then the others can come and join in, and I will move over here. Thank you so much for that. Lots to discuss, ladies and gentlemen. What I suggest we do is, if you first have any specific questions to any of the presentations, and then we can broaden out the discussion and, for example, give Udo a chance to give that response he was aching to give earlier. I don't forget, you see, Udo, I promise. So, any general, let's say, specific questions to specific speakers? Does anybody have a question to the findings of the research or anything of that nature? Anyone want to join the discussion at this point? Okay, I'll leave you to reflect and think a little, and we will come back on that a little bit later on. Just in terms of, you all talked about some of the challenges you were addressing. You described what you set out to achieve. Can I just ask you, really, what was in each of your areas the biggest, the most difficult issue, so that when we look to the future and say, how do we build on this work, what's the challenge that you faced? Have you overcome it, or does that continue for the future? Andreas, perhaps in your area, what was the biggest challenge for you? Did you solve it, or do we need to do more? You talked about process optimization. Where are we now?
I mean, this leads to a fundamental challenge when you do that type of work we were doing, because you heard that the processes analyzed were at the laboratory and the pilot level.
Yeah.
And when we look at the meat or animal-based products, we have major products which have been on the market for a very long time. So we need to find ways to somehow project the data we get from our colleagues, because we want to reflect those specific products which have been developed in this project, to scale them somehow up to what would be a commercial level, assuming they are already commercialized. So that was one of the challenges, and we solved that having a lot of discussions with our colleagues and using expert judgment to simulate somehow the commercial production level. From a technical side, that was the challenge. And the other thing is on the animal side, you have large ranges in the practice. So you somehow have to reflect also when you do a comparison, those ranges. And
to make sure you're not comparing apples with pears.
We made an upper and lower level for the animal-based products. What we presented here were only averages, but in order to see where we are, if we take, let's say, a good meat production level, do we still compare good against that? So that was our challenge, I would say. We can build upon that.
Other thoughts in terms of the biggest challenge you face and whether it's dealt with or there is outstanding work? Udo, in your area.
Yes. I think one of the challenges that we had to face for primary production is that, as I showed, that the primary or grain legumes have been disappearing in the European countryside for decades. There's been a small uprise in the 80s, but after that it's been, they diminished completely. This means that the experience of both of farmers of how to grow these crops has been lost as well. In Holland, we are now dealing with a generation which is near retiring, and they can still remember the 80s, where they were growing fava beans and peas on large scales. But this is the generation that is now retiring and handing the stick to the next generation, and they don't have any experience in growing grain legumes at all. And that's not the only thing that we're dealing with, but for instance, crop improvement has been on a standstill since the 80s as well. So whereas cereals, potatoes and all other kinds of crops have been increased in production because there were breeding successes. Like for wheat, the production has been risen maybe 30% since the 80s. The production increase or new varieties have not become available for faba beans, for lupins, or only on a very, very limited scale. And you see then there's been a standstill in production levels compared and a decrease compared to competitive crops like
Come
wheat.
back on what the implications are of that and how we may support, for example, the reskilling that you're talking about in the future. Jürgen, Emanuela, Consuela, in terms of the biggest challenge that you face, Jürgen, was there something you would highlight in particular that the project really wrestled with, and is it dealt with, or is there more work to do?
Well, I think one of the challenges when you are developing such fractionation processes is to kind of keep the balance or find the balance of the processing and to minimize resource consumption, the number of processing steps, and so you always should have the sustainability in mind, and therefore it was necessary to find solutions which are able to produce good qualities of ingredients, but on the other hand also to minimize the processing complexity, let's say. Yeah.
And do you feel you've cracked that nut, or is there more to do?
In some cases, yes, but not in all, I think, because we have investigated a lot of different crops, and we are not able to do that for all of them in the scope of the project. But for one, yes, and I think these are the ones which could go the next step. Yeah, that's, I think, and on the other hand, it's a very simple problem. We had not all the times enough raw materials to do, for example, a pilot scale processing, because first the agricultural producers, they need 2 or 3 years until they have developed the raw material, the sources we are using for the processing, and I think that's also a point which, probably in further projects could be taken into account.
Absolutely. Emanuele.
Yeah, just a few words. Basically, the big challenge was to deep understand the protein structure and protein functionality, to make sure that basically we were able to fulfill our requirement in terms of products development. But definitely, when you are functionalize a protein, you have to. Is a quite a big challenge, a compromising, because you need to improve, let's say, the texture, but then you compromise the flavor, and then so basically you have to try to
all these trade-offs all the time.
Right. So and also we were dealing with different type of protein sources. So basically find also the right interaction combination between proteins in order to succeed in developing products that basically were able or superior in terms of texture and flavor and color was quite challenging. I would say that the job is not finished. So there is so much to do.
Thank you. Consuelo.
Okay, thank you. I think for us, which is something very common in many of the EU projects, is to try to balance and to match the economic analysis with other biophysical analysis. Sometimes the conversation is not easy because there are different kinds of methods and different kinds of rationales. And different levels of observation. So we did put a lot of effort on that. Was a big challenge to match the analysis with Andrea's work in the life cycle assessment, because the environmental analysis for this kind of method is highly developed, but not the one in socioeconomics. So we really put a lot of effort in trying to match it. We had a lot of meetings. Fortunately, Andreas speaks Spanish beautifully, so that was a help, also meeting with other people, not just the researchers. And also the fact that we are using different scales of aggregation, because as Udo was mentioning, and we put a lot of effort in the production side because we are agronomists anyway, and we are much less into the production of new products. We see that there is not only a question of growing the proteins or having it support, but also the integration of the whole value chain, in the sense that in some areas in Spain there were traditional growers of those products. They're abandoning that, and it's not only the support of the policy, but also because they don't have processing industries nearby.
So it's getting that right. That's absolutely crucial. Andreas, you wanted to come in with something? Yeah.
No, I wanted. You encouraged us to have discussions
Absolutely.
among ourselves, and after all those statements, I think an interesting point is...
Can you hold the mic up a little bit? That's
Oh
it.
yeah, okay. An interesting point is that in our last work, in our recent work, we did some diet shift scenarios. And in those diet shift scenarios, one of those was assuming the same type or pattern of meat consumption, reducing that by 10% and displacing it with products in the style of the PROTEIN2FOOD product lines. And we saw that this would need the double of the area of pulses in the EU we have currently. But if we look at the EU's own agricultural outlook, they have a projection until 2030. They say that the area of pulses will remain the same as it is now.
So we simply can't do what you want to do. The competition for use of arable land is a key issue here.
This is a key issue, so we need much more area for it. The question is, we see the obstacles on the socio-economic part, the farmer information part. So the question is also to my colleagues, and Udo, your experience with farmers, what could be a way forward to increase the area we need? Because you addressed the demand, the increasing demand, which is now fed mostly with imported soy.
Yeah. Udo.
Well, one of the things that we are doing in the Netherlands as well, and I think my colleagues in other countries are doing more or less the same, is that farmers are ready to crop whatever is demanded in the market, but there needs to be a market. So if they are very willing to replace, for instance, part of their wheat or other crops with faba beans or lupins, as long as the price that is being paid for that product gives them a better net return than that of the competing crop like wheat. And at this moment, the import of soy is at such a ridiculously low price that it is not, if there is not a surplus in the price for these faba beans or lentils or lupins, then the farmer will not crop them.
And that raises the broader issue, and you in the policy recommendations developed by the project talk about grants and other incentives. So there is the market side, what makes money, where maybe do we have a lower yield but higher profitability and those sort of issues. But in terms of the implications of this from a policy point of view, what sort of support, is it the money? Is it the guidelines that to help address these issues? What will really make the difference for farmers in order to answer this very pressing challenge? What do you need, do you think?
Well, if you ask a farmer, he will probably say, well, we need better prices.
Yeah.
So that's the first
So
thing.
not so much the grants, and they focus on the price incentive.
If the prices are a bit like faba beans, for instance, to give an example, at this moment, feed prices for faba beans is about 18 euro cents a kilo, which is more or less the same as wheat. Whereas faba beans are a bit more difficult to grow than wheat. So if you're a farmer, you
do wheat.
obviously choose wheat. It's more known, the production is more stable, and you get just a better price. So if we want to have more production of grain legumes or other crops, then there needs to be a demand and also a fair price included, and then farmers will follow.
Okay.
That's no problem.
In terms of research and innovation and the Future Horizon Europe program and other projects sort of similar to this, working on it, new projects, where do you think another of the policy recommendations are talking about the importance of that continued investment in research and innovation? Where do we need to focus in future if we are to build on the work that you have all been doing? What for you are the priorities for the next financing period? Anybody want to come in? Where does the public money most need to be put, Jürgen, do you think? Grab a mic. There we are. We have two more, so we can...
Well, I think the public money, one point which is very important would be education. I think education of consumers, education in schools, whatever, that would be a point which could be addressed, and other public money as well for further research on the optimization of processes.
It's processes. Is it breeding programs? Where do we need it? You think it's process optimization, linking to Nick's point of earlier?
Not only that, also for the cropping. That's very important. Yeah.
Emanuele?
Well, definitely, I think also the consumer engagement, I think, is quite important. So making consumer aware what we should do and what we should, let's say, perform in order to have this protein transition, and make them aware that basically they're not just hitting a plant-based product, but they are contributing to a protein transition, to a food system transition towards more sustainable, and basically that will benefit not just some of the partners in the value chain, but also allow to have a better redistribution of the value through the value chain, starting from the farmers.
But do we need focusing, we'll come back on how that education should be done, and I want to link it to that point earlier about do we go backwards. In terms of the research into consumer behavior and what will drive the change that we need consumers to make, is there an area where you would particularly point to?
Definitely we were targeting the flexitarians. We try to, let's say, improve the plant-based consumption for those consumers that are basically meat lovers and animal-based products. So definitely what we need to do, we need to develop products that basically are highly nutritious, so they're well balanced, because that's also one of the main issue some of the vegan or vegetarian products has. So, and one of the main questions that basically they are basically make people fighting, in particular nutritionists. But also we have to make sure that basically we need to develop products that basically taste good, because if the product tastes good, consumers are much more willing to, let's say, experience new products. Of course, the price could be driven for moving this transition. I'm pointing out this because most of you have a chance to drink or buy plant-based milk. Sometimes is 2 or 3 times more let's say, expensive than regular plant milk, cow's milk. But then if you look back on the label, you see that basically just you're drinking water and sugar, without no protein or a very little amount of protein, and then you're still thinking that it is much healthier. That's the wrong message as well. So we have to develop a new generation of products that basically taste good, but also is good for your health.
So, and that issue of affordability, accessibility, attractiveness, and as you say, if you're going to, you need to be consistent in your message. So it really has to be good for you. In terms of research and innovation priorities first, or you want to come back on that?
I just want to take upon what Emanuele said, and want to add that transparency of information is very important. I had an interview with a German television, and they wanted to talk about the sustainability of those new burger patties, plant-based, which try to be as similar as possible to the animal-based patties. And I try to inform myself about what's in there. And where does the soy which is used, if you at all find the information that it's soy-based
Yep.
and that it's isolates or concentrates, this information is not easy to get, but then where that soy comes from is almost impossible to get. And
So traceability is
the
very
tr-
important. Yep.
transparency about the supply chains, because only then you can really say what it's worth or not worth. And that information is still lacking, and I think we need more requirements for transparency and information about the supply chains of the ingredients. So this is one point.
Sure. And on future research and innovation funding, particularly at European level, what do we need to focus on?
Well, money matters, of course, in this context, and but it has a lot to do with breaking the power, because we have the Common Agricultural Policy, and in the last 10 years we were talking a lot about greening of the European agriculture and the Common Agricultural Policy, and there were some greening measures, but they did not achieve necessarily the goals they had. And I think there must be more focus upon putting the money in different directions. And for instance, what Udo has mentioned, the farmers need revenues for what they produce. And if they produce more legumes and integrate legumes in their crop rotation, this has an environmental benefit. So the external costs are reduced, but we don't see that reduction of external costs in increased revenues for the farmers. And this has to change, I think.
Yeah. Consuelo.
Yeah, I would like to stress for future research the international dimension that we need in this protein transition, because we see that if agriculture, or as Udo was mentioning, that farmers are looking at the price they are going to get, for their products. But these products are in the market, and there are international markets and products that are grown elsewhere. So we have to look at that dimension. Also look at really whether the change or the transition is going to come as policy-driven, market-driven, or society-driven. Society-driven, I'm saying consumer-driven, health-driven, right? Or environmental concerns-driven. But we really have to look at what is the real transition in policy terms, as you were very well mentioning in terms of what the Commission really is setting forth. So I think that these variety of issues, and also the adaptation of the farming system in itself to these more ecological issues.
So really picking up there on something that was very much in the Commission's report on the protein transition back in 2018, that point about the competitiveness.
Yeah.
So competitiveness with other crops. So if you're developing new products, new crops, are they competitive with what's already there? But also non-EU countries and the international market, you see as a key area. Lots to come back on, but I want to have another go at seeing if we can entice the audience to join. I say it doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment. I'll come here and then I'll come to you afterwards, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have a question.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry,
Thanks.
my name is Heidi from Kosukra in Belgium. I have a question for Andreas related to the graphs you showed on the carbon footprint, comparing plant-based foods to animal-based foods. The plant-based foods that you used in these comparisons, were they based on ingredients obtained by dry fractionation or wet processing? And then the second part of my question would be, did you also compare carbon footprint or environmental impact on dry fractionation compared to wet processing?
It's a specific question, so let's take it straight away, Andres.
Well, this is not, for me now, not easy to answer because it's a detail. We have looked at it, but we are a group of workers, so I could give you that information later on because it's in one of our reports, but I don't have it present now. The difference between wet and dry fractionation in terms of environmental results, and I think Jürgen, you can help me. The lentil case where we looked at the lentil-based meat
Yes,
versus the chicken meat that was?
It was based on a protein isolate.
Yeah, on a wet
Yes.
fractionation, yeah.
Okay. We'll get you more information about that later on. Question at the back here. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Riccardo Siligato from Copa Cogeca, European Farmers and Agri-Cooperatives, and we represent farmers and agri-cooperatives across the European Union. It's more than comment. I think the narrative this morning has been somehow a bit simplistic in some cases. For example, I was a little surprised to hear that from Dr. Detzel that the assumption that all the soy is related to deforestation. I mean, there are many aspects that the farmers are improving about in terms of sustainability. For example, soy is becoming more and more sustainable, coming from certified production from US, for example. And the production of the European agriculture has increased the production by 20%, but has decreased the greenhouse gas emissions by 20% as well. So it's really improving, and we have the best standards of the world. This is for sure. But I'm happy to discuss about this after lunch.
Absolutely. Riccardo will be joining us for our panel on the way forward after lunch. Any other, you can react to that in a moment, but let me just see before we do whether anybody, yes, thank you very much.
Good morning, thank you very much for the discussion. I'm Maria Belén from University in Naples, Federico II in Naples. And my question is for Emmanuel. How do you think, how could you perceive we could direct for the future to consumers? Should we mimic exactly how meat looks, how dairy look, or should we bring new and disruptive innovations with a high nutritional value?
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I'm going to take a group in the interest of using time, so hang fire for a moment.
Good morning, my name is Karel van Bommel from DG Agri. I have a question to Udo. When you were referring to the prices of faba beans and grains, were you also looking at what are the gross margins of the growing pulses versus growing grains to see whether it is attractive to farmers to include them? And an additional question, as most as pulses are nitrogen fixing, are farmers enough aware of the benefits for including pulses into crop rotation, especially with the higher yields in the next years?
Thank you. Hang on, I'll come back. And you'll be joining us this afternoon as well. So we're getting little tasters from our afternoon panel this morning. Please, sir.
Hello, my name is Henk Westbroek from Netherlands Environment Assessment Agency. I have two related questions. The first of all is, did you also consider the consumption of pulses as such, so not in a processed form, but just pulses as a typical food product, or what used to be eaten a long time ago as a staple food? And the second question is, did you also look at products which are now being used as feeds, but are high in proteins, like grain middlings or like oil meals from rapeseed or sunflower, or from distiller's grain, that kind of products as source of proteins for alternative products?
Thank you very much indeed. And I saw another hand somewhere. Yes.
Thank you very much. So I'm Gina Del Pozo with Lira Novel Food, and I was wondering, how do you aim to solve the issue that protein isolates penetrate through intestinal permeability more easily and provoke allergies as well as inflammation?
Okay, quite a scientific question. Not sure I understand it, but hopefully one of you do. Can anyone pick up on it? It's very specific. Can anyone help us with that one? Or is it too detailed for this panel?
Well, what should I say here? I mean, some of the protein sources we investigated are not listed in the allergen as allergens. So, of course, there is a lot of work to do, and to investigate in particular, because one of the prototype we developed is also infant food formula. And it's also, this is a kind of a hot topic, and then we have to be very careful here in this particular case that, you know, this specific topic will be properly addressed. And of course, further investigation need to be done. So it's not been used before lentil isolates for specific purpose, so definitely much more study need to be performed. Regarding the questions, I believe that we should not mock plant, meat and dairy products. Not because we cannot do, because we can. The point is at which cost? You know, because if you see some of the most selling plant-based alternative burgers have a handed list of ingredients. So what's the point? So I think on the other side, what we should do is just look on different type of products. You know, here when I make my slides, I have to categorize, you know, to make you familiar with which type of food products we were discussing or focusing on. But doesn't need to be that. Basically need to be a plant milk replacement or whatsoever. You know, I think consumers were willing to, you know, take the challenge and experience, you know, new type of products as long as they are tasty. This is, I think, the most important things. And of course, besides the fact that basically we are also developing highly nutritious products. Going back to the previous statement regarding competitiveness.
Yeah.
You know, most of the time we are making the big mistakes when we are not. Here we are comparing pears with apples, because most of the let's say traditional food products doesn't put in their account the environmental impact and cost that basically they are not carrying. You know, so it's also another point we have to keep in mind when we are not comparing and you know, in terms of price and competitiveness. Plant-based products with animal-based products.
So when you talked in your policy recommendations you've been developing about pricing policies, that was where you were pointing to, that internalisation of the external costs has to be part of it.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's what I
Thank
think.
you. There was a couple of specific questions to Udo about fava beans and margins and nitrogen fixing and the benefits thereof. Can you pick up on those?
Yes. The question from the gentleman over there. First of all, there was that whether within the calculation of the costs, whether the full cost of cultivation were included. We have been doing quite a lot of those comparisons. Yes. The fact is, if you compare it to wheat, the overall cropping costs of fava beans are more or less the same. They don't differ that much. Most of the things that you need to do to sow, weed and harvest wheat is more or less the same that you need to do for fava beans. So there's not a lot of difference over there. You need a bit less of nitrogen. So there you are a bit more cheap. On the other hand, at this time, the seeding cost is a bit higher for fava beans because the seeds are a bit more expensive. Overall, it doesn't matter that much. So the main difference is whether you get the same, the amount of price that you get for the, so it's tonnage times the price. That's what you have to compare. The other thing that you asked is whether farmers are aware of the benefits of fava beans compared to other crops for the next crop. And yes, they are aware, but if they fully are aware of all, they need to start cropping a crop first and then see for themselves. Either people visiting a farm can tell a farmer 1,000 times that it's so beneficial because your next crop will benefit from, and then a farmer says, yeah, you say that because you want to sell me your seeds. Or as a scientist, if you come at a farm, he says, yeah, theoretically, yes, you're right, but here on a farm in real time, it works differently. If a farmer experiences itself, that if he has planted fava beans on one half of a field and another crop on another field, and then he has potatoes or wheat on the whole field the next year, and he sees differences in height, then he says, it's incredible what I've seen. Did you know that fava beans are an excellent pre-crop?
Experience is the only...
always the key.
Okay, thank you. There was also a question relating to the consumption of pulses and to moving from feed to alternative products. Can anybody pick up? I'm not sure who it was directed at specifically. Emmanuel.
I think there was a question regarding using different protein sources from other side streams, for example, rapeseed oil or sunflower oil. Yeah. Well, definitely, all these protein fractions will be side streams from this process, but then considering this circularity approach that we are going to endorse in this project and in the next one, they can actually become a raw material, interesting raw material for complementing process. I want to stress also the point here regarding nutritional aspects. The more we combine different protein sources, the better chance we have to reach a better amino acids balance. So basically to check the box regarding the nutritional quality of these new products.
Consuelo, can I just ask you something? It didn't come up in the audience, but a question I had, linking it to our conversation about consumers and the message to consumers and what drives behavior change, choice change. You pointed to the fact that in some countries, consumption of protein products is up, and in others it's down. It seemed to link to how high it was before, perhaps to an extent. But do you think, what is the implication of that? You appealed in your recommendations for a diversity, you said there's a diversity of consumer behavior and patterns. We need to take that into account. What does that mean in terms of the messaging and the degree to which we can at European level, if you like, have a broad communication message to consumers? Or do you think it has to be very different in very different countries because of where we're coming from, as it were, the starting point?
Well, I don't really have the answer, the definite answer, but I think that what you pointed out lastly is that it is different in different countries. In some countries probably there is a higher consciousness of the benefits of consuming these crops, and in others it's because, as you said, because they have already consumed a large amount of these crops, like in Mediterranean countries, for instance. Yeah. But I think that that varies a lot, and I think that the research that we did in Spain and some growing areas is that they are abandoning these crops because of the vertical integration with the processing industries. That was something that also drove them, not to produce those crops as one element, not the only one. Okay. The others are the ones that you have explained.
We are almost out of time, and I want to make sure you have plenty of time for your lunch, not least because we will be including some of the grain legumes that have been worked on by this project, so you need time to sample the products. But I want, before we go, to try this, to really start the conversation we're going to have with this afternoon's panel about where do we go from here. So for each of you, and I'll go straight down the line, finishing with Consuelo, if you had to, this is very unfair because I know there are so many elements to this, but either relating to your own specific area of work on this project or more broadly, if we are to, going back to the title of our session today, our event today, accelerate the protein transition, really have that dramatic leap forward that we need, what for each of you, let's put it this way, because saying one priority for action is probably not fair, but a key next step, one thing we need to do next if we're going to get there. 1 minute each. I'll start with Jürgen, go straight down the line. Jürgen.
Well, regarding the processing, the ingredients, I would say that we have very nice results. We have developed technologies for flours, for isolates, and I think the next step would be the next step would be to go the next step to the industrial implementation for these technologies.
So taking it up to the industrial level. Emanuele.
Yeah, definitely the cost-effective protein functionalization. So basically, we have to find a way to be more effective in functionalize the protein in terms of texture, color, appearance, and of course, nutrients. At the same time, something that has not been pointed out here, also we are targeting to reduce as much as possible the anti-nutrients that basically are now in some of these legumes crops that we are investigating, because it's also help to get a better shape of the future protein that we planning to develop.
Thank you very much. Udo.
It is a it's a difficult question to see what's the key thing, but I think there needs to be, and I'm referring a bit to the talk that has been done earlier on the need in also in the European landscape for more agro-biodiversity and ecological systems and farming systems, is that why have we developed in the way that we have developed now in agriculture is because there is in our economic system at this moment a plus or an advantage of monocultures, of reducing the crops that we grow, so reducing the diversity in the field to only crop those most beneficial crops in the countryside. If we want to break that cycle, I think some kind of support from either European Union really targeting those crops that have fallen off the wagon to give them at least a first push again to catch up is at least needed to get them back in the countryside again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Andreas.
Well, there is a trend. Oh, you have one. Sorry.
We have an accumulation of microphones.
There is a trend towards convenience food, which seems to be necessary for the modern lifestyle, and in that sense, the products, the prototypes which have been developed in the PROTEIN2FOOD project will help steer that food consumption trend into the right direction. But I think it's important, and that's for the day after tomorrow. PROTEIN2FOOD is for tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow is we need to open consumption again to less processed foods, less processed protein foods. And it's difficult to achieve, but I think we have to focus upon that too.
Thank you very much indeed. Consuelo, you have the last word.
Okay, well, I'm not so sure whether it's the last word, but what I would say is one of the good things that I've learned a lot, not coming from the agro-bio world, but more the economic analysis. That in this project, first of all, the products were already available, to do the analysis from the starting days of the, not exactly the starting days, but soon enough, to do the analysis. And this is crucial and not very frequent in many projects that have, on the one side, the technical issues and the socioeconomic issues. This is the one thing that I think that can be helpful for new projects, based on that. Also because there are the ingredients. So they are, in this respect, looking at sustainable solutions. Yeah. This is something that's there. But in terms of research and innovation, in terms of what the future is, I think that research and innovation plays a crucial role in here, and also communication to society for really focusing to these agroecological systems with diversity of crops, etc., which is already in the Common Agricultural Policy, crop rotation and not only crop diversification. So in that respect, I think is crucial. I think, again, that together with agronomic analysis and laboratory-oriented, ingredient-oriented analysis, there has to be also analysis related to society and economics. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed for a great session? And thank you particularly for doing the utterly impossible. 5 years of very intense work presented in about 7 minutes each. So I really am very grateful. I know that must have been an agony to do, but you have managed to share a great deal with us in a very short space of time. So thank you for that. Stay there.